It's the Dev Friday Show with Mark and Tim.
I don't know why. I don't know why it doesn't. Anyway, now every time I play that thing, it stutters a little bit. And interestingly enough, now I can't even hear myself, Mark. So, but you can hear me, right? Can you hear me?
It's very low.
What happened there? All right, let's try this again. How's that? Is that any
We should
better
just
there?
restart this episode.
How about this? Can you hear me now?
It's a
Can you hear me now?
disaster.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, I can hear
Let's
you.
turn it. Okay, so
Oh my God.
at least we have bumper
This
music
live
this
to
time.
tape does not work well.
It's not even tape any. Oh, I see what happened there. That was ridiculous. I still overdrove the mic though, so we'll have to figure this out. Does anybody care? Do you think? Like to
don't know.
explain what this setup is? I don't think anybody cares.
We've been offline for so long. We got back
Does
online
any-
last week. I don't know who. I don't even understand who listened to us before.
That's
and
that's
and it's
accurate,
probably
yeah.
going to take another 6 months for those listeners
That-
those few listeners to finally come back and realize we're actually doing this again.
I forgot to mention because we talked about how I was just fresh off the plane from PHP Tech. I mean, 4 months ago. But it's like we did our last show. I was going to PHP Tech, and then not our last show, but the show before our break. And then I get back. But I actually ran into some listeners at PHP Tech. Can you believe it?
Really? Well, you do have a following, Tim.
I have a following.
Within the PHP community. You are well known, and that's
I
why I'm telling you.
I don't know if I'd say that.
When you go to these events and you speak, the first thing you should be doing is saying,
I have
in your profile, in your bio. We talk about that. I'm
okay.
I'm fine for you saying phone burner first.
Oh, nice. You're fine with that. That's nice. That's kind.
Right after that should be Dev Friday Show host.
Right. Okay. At the devfridayshow.com.
Yeah.
So anyway, I ran into now what this is oddly appropriate or relevant discussion because we were talking and they said something about another podcast and about how the audio on that podcast was like perfect, like high fidelity, and how I took it was not us. Like we are not that podcast with, you know what I'm saying? Like we're also not the NPR type podcast that, is kind of a little stuffy, right? A little stuffy, when you're like August the 16th, Dev Friday Show episode 82
is that we are not stuffy.
We're not stuffy.
We're
no,
the complete opposite of that.
No, and I mean we try to get good clean audio because you record on your end, I record on mine. But since I also play the bumper music, I don't want to record the bumper music coming through at the same time. So it's an interesting setup here. I have a input into my computer that takes my mic in. And then it also outputs my mic back to a little mixer that has the audio that comes from my computer, my other computer. So when I play the bumper music, I actually set up the live stream to be using my kind of like my USB sound card input versus this actual recording sound card input. We record from the digital, I forget what is it? It's I don't know. I forget who makes it. But we record on the high end sound card and then just take the mic output pass through back through this board. And then for the live stream, we use the stuff that comes off the board because that's where I can mix in the audio. So we get a clean stream of me, we get a clean stream of you. And then when we do it in post, we put it all back together and the bumper music sounds fine. But no, for some reason, the stream, last week and today was defaulting to the high end sound card. So it wasn't hearing the bumper music. But now once we got that, now all the volumes and levels are all messed up. So we're just rolling with it. I'm looking at my recording and it doesn't look like I'm overdriving it anymore. So as long as you can hear me, Mark.
Maybe we could actually start the show.
Can you hear me?
Wait,
is this what is it? This is like you have topics you want to get to? Is that what this is? Is that what this is? Like it's 10 minutes and we've not talked about these.
I'm doing the show. I'm still managing team chats here, trying to
give me a break. All right, that's fine. I'm gonna check my Slack. Mark, you go on and you talk for a little bit. I'll catch up with my team over here. Anyway.
Oh
So
my
you
gosh.
so you realize that you shouldn't fire off a bunch of you said Teams, is that what it is? You use
That's what, yeah.
Microsoft Teams?
So we use Teams, and you use Slack at your work, right?
We use Slack, yeah,
Yeah,
yeah, because we're far hipper than you guys, that's for sure.
that's true. Is Slack cheaper? Curious. What's from a
I
cost
have no
perspective?
who knows.
I thought Slack
Here's
was like crazy expensive, but then Teams is a Microsoft product, and they like to license everything together. So who knows?
I think it's this: if you are paying for the rest of Microsoft,
Mm-hmm.
I think you're getting Teams for free.
It's true.
So
Yep.
why wouldn't you use it? And I saw an article. I basically just read the headline, but that was the point they were making. Slack, better product, but doesn't matter when you're already paying for other things and they bundle Teams. That's why everybody's using Teams, right? And the question is anybody using Google Hangouts?
Google Hangouts. Now
Or
that's a
Google
callback.
or Google Chat, or what is the Google Meet? What is the
I
what is the
haven't
Google
used
thing?
a Google Chat or Meet product in years. That's interesting.
Okay. What's
'Cause
your
usually
what's
I
your-
just use, well, from coming from academia, we use Zoom. That Zoom is pretty much
yeah.
throughout, both for high school and college.
Do you
Everybody uses Zoom.
Do you use Teams for video conferencing at the
Yep,
new gig?
we use Teams
Okay.
for everything. Yep.
Yeah. Yeah, we use Slack and then Zoom. So it's like that, two different systems, which I think is fine. I think Zoom works pretty well.
I'm curious if Slack will ever want to build in a Zoom-like feature or Teams-like
They do that.
video feature. They do. They actually have it in. I don't know.
Yeah,
I've
it's
never
called
tried it
Huddles.
before.
It's generally terrible.
That's why you don't use it. Okay.
Not for if we're gonna actually do any type of collaboration, it's not in a huddle. Like Huddle's a great thing for a quick little video call.
Yeah.
But if you're collaborating with a group of people, it's not in a huddle because their screen sharing is terrible. And everybody's a square. Like the weird they make the video square, not the actual resolution of or the actual aspect ratio of your camera. And then like when you share, I guess maybe I'm spoiled because Zoom has good support for dual monitors, where you can split your video off into a second screen.
Yeah.
And you can have your team on the one side, and then the screen share on it. So I generally have the call itself on one screen and then full screen with somebody else when they're screen sharing. Slack doesn't give you any of those options. It's all kind of like built into one window, which is, it still pops out of Slack, so that's good. But no, it's no Zoom. But what do you use for just like chat? Like if you're contacting family, things like that. Because that's
we're
what
all on the iMessage.
Oh, so you're bought into that. You're bought into that iOS stuff, aren't you?
Well, it's interesting.
Yeah.
I actually was on Android for a few years, and the rest of my family was on had iPhones, and I just wanted to be on Android for a bit, just to see the other side of the world. I mean, I did really like it. And the only thing that was annoying was that there is I think that's getting better now, but there's a big disconnect when you try to message people, going from iPhones to Android phones. There's a little bit of a delay there. Also, if you try to send like images are okay, but you try to send a video, it compresses it, makes a thumbnail out of it, and it's like really messed up. Mm-hmm. So the not integration, but just the transmission of data between iPhone and Android when it comes to messaging was not really that good. But I think Apple's finally starting to make that a little bit better. So
isn't iMessage based pretty much tied to your phone number? Or am I wrong there?
Well, it's tied to a combination of your phone number and your account, your Apple account. So you have to have your Apple account with your email address, and then you associate your phone number with that.
Can you? I guess I'll ask a different way. Can you SMS somebody, the Apple to Apple, and it not use iMessages?
Yeah, that's
I feel like they just kind of really tied it tightly. Where it's like if you're gonna message somebody and you think it's it's like you think it's a text message to somebody, but they have iMessage and you have iMessage.
That's a really good question, because I don't think you can actually have an iPhone without having an Apple account.
Right.
So you have to have an Apple account to have an iPhone. So I don't know if you could force send. I know there's an option for send as SMS to. I think there is. No, because I have done that before. Because I was trying to force send there. Yeah, they do have an option for that, but it's kind of hidden. You kind of have to press hard. But
that's what I mean. Like they put it right on top of phone number messaging or SMS messaging.
Yeah.
Okay. So from your perspective, I'm just curious. We've got kids. And a couple of them, the older ones, have Google accounts. So throughout the day, I'll get messages from them I mean, they're in the other room, but still. Throughout the day, I'll get message from them on whatever it is now. I guess it's Google Chat. It's what used to be Hangouts. Is now Chat. Mm-hmm. And I would just wonder, like, as we get more and more kids doing school on their computer, it's like, do I want to get them all Google accounts? You know, because honestly, here's the thing. Google has family accounts where you can manage the kids' accounts, but it tops out at 6 members. So that's me, my wife, and 4 kids. And that's not gonna work well for us. I contacted the support. They're like, well, you and your wife could have separate families. I'm like, that's not exactly the point of what this family is trying to accomplish here. But and then what do I do once I run out of those?
For Tim-size family, they need a Tim-size family plan.
Yeah. It's like, I'll pay you more. Like, what do you want from me? But apparently they don't want me. That
is pretty arbitrary. Like so they cap it at 6. You said?
Yeah, but I mean, I don't think there's a way, because it allows you to manage it, and if you're going to sign up under 13 to a Google account, it needs to be in that context. Mm-hmm. Like, you don't have a way to create one without it being tied to a family account. So they basically made it impossible for me to get accounts for my younger children, which, I mean, maybe they're doing me a favor there. But but it also ties it to, like, there's a family payment device. Like, and you can enable people to buy apps with the family payment, whatever that, if you set that up, if you have a card that's the family payment, and certain apps that you buy through the Play Store, or a lot of videos and media and stuff like that, it shares with everybody in your family. So I understand we only let 6 people in, because what they don't want is me to be like, hey, everybody's my family, right? And everybody can share these apps that I'm buying. But at the same time, it does put me in kind of an interesting situation where now I'm scratching my head and wondering, if I just want the kids to be able to communicate with us from their computers as they do school, for the entire time of our marriage, my wife and I have used Google Chat for that, which whatever variation it was. But is there another chat platform? Of course, if you're in the Apple ecosystem, you're just using You're using iMessage, which is just on top of, like, the idea of an identity being tied to a phone number, which they don't have phones either. So
when you message your wife on Google Chat, are you doing this on your phone? So like a Google Chat app on the Android phone?
I am on the phone, but I'm also on my computer. Like, it's anywhere.
So you prefer to do that more than rather than just SMSing?
Yeah, because the history and everything.
Okay, that makes sense.
It's only recently that Android had the messages, like whatever the web interface is for your message, which still your phone needs to be online to send.
Oh yeah. So if you want to go between, like, your computer, tablet, and you want to have that consistent, sort of an Apple experience where everything, the ecosystem allows you to kind of go between different devices.
iMessage from your device, right?
Yeah, and see it on your Mac if you want to at any place, and
that's what Google Chats was.
Okay, that makes sense.
So and it's just like, now I'm wondering, like, I mean, that works well for us, but and honestly, as long as the app can be accessed from a web browser and from your phone, any app fits that bill. Like, I don't care that I'm not sending the messages over SMS. I'd rather not send the message over SMS, right? But I'm just scratching my head wondering, like, as we go on, because here's the other thing. Apparently, I'm an educational institution, Mark.
I can see that.
I wanted the kids to learn Fusion 360. And have you ever downloaded Fusion 360?
Yes, I have. A while ago, back when, in my new media courses, I definitely.
Now, did you do it? Did you do it through an educational license?
Through the school. I think they had the license through the school, and I just tried it through that. Yeah.
Yeah. If you don't, so Fusion 360 is great. It is like, you remember the Apple model way back in the day of how they give computers to schools.
Yep.
Because then everybody leave like, well, I know how to do it on an Apple. I mean, great. A great future marketing plan.
That's the greatest place to build the cult.
There you go.
Start the schools.
So Fusion is the same thing. They do even more than that. You can download Fusion 360 for free, as long as you're not using it for commercial use. So if you're a hobbyist that just wants to play with some stuff on your 3D printer, you download Fusion 360 for free and use it. And then, as you probably like, if you really like it, and then you're like, oh man, maybe I should pursue a career in here and this, then you go and you have Fusion 360 experience. So they already have someone who's trained on it, and you go to a shop, and you can probably pick up SolidWorks or something else, but you're biased towards that. So I get why they're giving it away free for non-commercial use. However, getting that license is a pain. I mean, it's not that much of a pain. But you have to put your email address, you have to click a bunch of things, you have to answer a bunch of questions, and then boom, you got your license. And you have to go through all that just to get to the download it, to put it on your system. And if I want for the kids to learn Fusion 360, I want to be able to work together on each of their computers and be doing whatever the exercise is. And I can't use the same license because, Fusion's connected to the web, and it's like, nope, you're using it over here, you can't be using it over there, which completely makes sense. But the idea of trying to get either educational licenses or the free license for each of the kids and walking through that process 4 times seemed a bit much. So I just looked, I'm like, can I call myself a school? Because I am one, and certainly I can. So I registered as the IT administrator for our homeschool. All I had to do is get an official letter from the school district that's like, yes, these people are homeschooling, and submit it. And now I have a few licenses. Guess how many licenses? Guess what their minimum IT license, seats are for someone who the minimum. Yeah, because you can ask for more.
My gut feelings around 10 or 12.
You're close. It's a little higher. I currently have 3,000. 3,000 licenses for Fusion.
Okay, that seems a little excessive.
I know, right? Well, I guess like, please don't bother us unless you have a lot of students.
If they're giving it out to an organization like a school,
right,
that has many students.
I think you're gonna invite a lot of students if you're like a VOTEC type school and all that. So no, but they're all set up and they should start that. But yeah, 3,000. So I've got a few spare. So I unlike Google, which limits me to 6, which with me in the group means really 5. Fusion's a little bit more open. So they're like, oh, a family your size, here's 3,000 licenses. Have fun. But we'll see how that goes. So what'd you break this morning, Mark?
I didn't break anything. I was just testing some pipelines of data workflows, and so between the different environments, especially when it comes to one thing is interesting too that I learned at this position, especially working with AWS, is that AWS cannot see PII information.
AWS cannot see?
Yes. So they have very, very strict policies. So this is fascinating for me to learn about, working with the AWS consultants. So they're the pro serve consultants in the company that I'm working with, is that they have very strict policies about have access to environments that have PII information. So unless and it may be contractually, maybe for certain organizations. So if you're working for the government, or if you're working, if you have certain, maybe some clearances, I think there's different ways around that. But for working with organizations like businesses, if those businesses have PII information, they have very super strict policies about how the AWS developers cannot have access to environments that could have that information. So like at any, dev org, you have
much of your information is PII though, right?
Yeah, especially because we deal with academic information.
Yeah.
So it's interesting where we have, in any academic or any development organization, you're going to have different environments, right? So you have like your sandbox or dev area, or you have maybe another dev layer. And then you're going to have like your staging or QA environment, and then you're going to have your production, right? So the way that we work it is that, in our production and staging QA, that has the PI information, that has the, all that there, because then also we try to keep staging QA as close to production as possible. So not all the data is there, but, a lot of it is. But then in our sandbox and dev environments, that there is no PI information. We do have a little bit of production data if it is non-PI related, like, so if it's just like, IDs, like generic, like GUIDs and ID numbers and stuff like that.
That's fine.
That might be associated. But everything else is sanitized. I'm trying to think of the word for that.
Yeah.
Sanitized, or just kind of, goes through some process where we can kind of make a, information generic. So it's not, it doesn't have any personal information that's related to it. So then AWS pretty much works off of those two environments. So then once changes gets promoted to the other environments, then really only internal people like me can really take a look at it and to start to test out these pipelines here. So
for what you're doing, you need the PII. You're processing PII.
Well, if we're testing, let's say, changes that are going to go into production, so that final QA test phase before we're going to promote this change to production, we do need to run it through all of our pipelines to make sure that that update's going to work. So if we do find any issues, we want to point those out and then try to see if we can, we don't try to fix them in our QA stage environment. See, okay, what is the issue? Is it a configuration between the dev to our QA environment, and it basically just have to make sure the infrastructure is consistent, or is there like a data issue between the two, and we can kind of work around that?
Okay, let me just understand, because you're saying you run it through some pretty much sanitized sample data that should be similar enough, and it all worked there. Now we try it in QA, which AWS does not have access to, but it has actual information here. Something breaks. So is it the fact that we just have a lack of parity between?
It could be. Most often that's what it is. Like, okay, and also with AWS, and a lot of these issues are relying with permissions, because as you know, when you work with AWS, is like you're kind of in permission hell a little bit, because you're kind of like, if the permissions is off a little bit, or let's say, especially if your permissions are set with like a CDK project that's establishing the permissions within that CloudFormation stack. If something is not consistent as it kind of moves to the environments, that could definitely cause some issues. And that's most of the issues that I find.
If you're not rebuilding your environments, right? Because you're playing with a lot of different pipelines and things that are all built of AWS components, right?
Yeah.
If you're not rebuilding them, how do you manage the change? Like, how do you do change management between, over here in the test environment where we're all able to see it? Oh, you know what? The thing that made this work better was we changed this configuration of this function, this asset, like whatever it is. In AWS land, how do you maintain that parity? Because that seems like that'd be
that is something that we're talking about building. We just actually had a meeting yesterday about definitely building better controls and observability between our environments, so we can know exactly if there is inconsistencies in regards to both infrastructure and data, and we can make sure that we can bring those two in sync as much as possible.
Because someone can just go to the web interface and click to fix it.
Well, that's what we usually do. Like our DevOps team usually will go in and then you verify in the AWS console from a permission standpoint, go look at all the roles, the permissions, and kind of see on the different services and make sure that they're consistent, or if something needs to get updated. Sometimes we'll do a little bit of debugging in our stage and QA environment, just to kind of see, manually, just do a little click ops, go through and just try to do a few changes there to kind of see, okay, if we can kind of pinpoint the actual where the issue is, and then we'll try to roll that change back into a programmatic change into our CDK projects. It's pretty interesting.
So your CDK, though, like, I think of the CDK as building up these assets, but you actually, I'm guessing, you use the CDK to modify them as well?
Well, it's correct. Well, the CDK is basically just it's a development tool that will generate CloudFormation templates. And CloudFormation has state management of the infrastructure, right? So as you are rolling out different versions of your CloudFormation template, CloudFormation is keeping track of those changes. So let's say if you have to modify a resource, renaming resources can be kind of tricky, because it'll just want to create a new resource most often, and then orphan other resources. But if you want to just do resource changes, that's CloudFormation will manage that, and then manage the state of that between different versions of the and all the CDK is basically a way for us to use TypeScript or another programming language to basically do it programmatically. So if you want to, let's say, go through and build out EC2 instances, and you want to say, okay, I want to go through and build out 20 EC2 instances for different purposes. I just want to kind of have basically one block of code and just iterate through that. It just makes it easier rather than doing it through a big YAML or JSON file and then kind of managing that. So, because then what CDK does is that generates the actual YAML or JSON that then gets sent to AWS to kind of build out the infrastructure with CloudFormation.
So with the cloud, so with the CDK, it generates CloudFormation, right? Does that result in, like, can you apply changes that way and not just build up, say, new services, but like say, hey, this was the CloudFormation file, this is the new one, which then should change an active service?
Correct. Yeah, CloudFormation is a managed server that does that, hopefully, behind the scenes. There are a lot of times where we may have to manually go into the console and may have to tear down a stack. Let's say, because let's say this often happens, you try to do renaming. So if you rename a service, and if CloudFormation doesn't really know how to rename it well, and then what happens is that it'll just create a whole new resource and then orphan the other resource. And then so basically have two resources. It'll make the connection between the different services to the new resource and disconnect it from the old. So that becomes an issue. So sometimes you may have to tear down certain stacks. And stack is basically a set of infrastructure within, let's say, that CloudFormation release. So if you release a CloudFormation template, it could have usually multiple stacks within that release. And so a lot of times you have to go into maybe modify one of those stacks, possibly manually delete it, and then redeploy it so that everything is connected properly.
Gotcha. Okay, so you're still able to kind of manage then your infrastructure with that template, and you don't have to build up most of the time for fresh. It'll migrate.
Oh no, it'll migrate because you don't want to, especially as you're dealing with data stores like databases, S3 buckets, everything where our data is relocated. Right. We don't really want those, and we try to be super careful about when we're renaming. Usually, when we're renaming things, is usually, let's say, our glue jobs or like Lambda functions. That's fine to rename, and that does a pretty good job handling that. But once you start thinking about refactoring where you're storing your data, that can be a little bit tricky.
Gotcha.
And then you're probably going to have some processes in place because your data will still be there, but let's say it'll be in an orphaned S3 bucket or a database that still exists. It's just not connected to your services. So you could migrate the data over if you needed to. It's because it's still there. You're not going to lose it, but it creates more hassle, more work. So that's why you have to be super careful about. If you're refactoring your data layers, that's something you want to be a little bit careful about.
So then like you say, you run into an issue where, hey, this worked over here in the sanitized test environment. We apply it to QA, something doesn't work. We got to figure out why. I'm guessing that's like, why did applying a CloudFormation template not get it in the same state? Maybe, or like you said, it could be an actual problem with the data. Like the sanitized data worked, but data with actual PII doesn't.
So why I bring this up is because it's not just about that process, but it's interesting the fact of learning how AWS works. Their pro-serve consultants when they have to be very careful about, and they told me about what the policies that AWS has, where like if they find out that a developer had access to PI information in an organization, they have to go through a huge audit, and it's a huge thing that they have to kind of go through to validate that what data they saw, did they change it, and just have everything disclosed as much as possible from a legal perspective. I understand, but it is just really, really fascinating. So, but also one thing I saw that is from a developer experience. I was never kind of faced with that, saying, okay, if I was working in an organization or building out a product, I could be there end to end. In the development or staging area to production, right? And you're always in each of these environments, and you can be able to go back and forth between them, and to make sure it's really, really consistent. So it is a huge issue, and that's why the company was brought in me and a few other developers to start to migrate away from.
Oh, because that pain. Because if they can't even see the real data, what in the world?
It becomes they do use other organizations, other third parties. Which helps, that do have contracts in place that aren't AWS related, that they provide IT infrastructure support and some development support that then they could go into their production environments and then be able to see the data, help debug and resources. So they do have partners that they do have. But once again, once you integrate with a partner, that's an extra cost and an extra dependency that you may have to work with. So.
That's super interesting. I know the policies that we see all the time are it's almost phrased like the only people that have access to this data are the ones that need it.
Yeah.
So it's like, well, as long as there's what's the justification? Yeah, I need to see it because I'm writing the code for it. I need to be able to troubleshoot this stuff. But I'm guessing, AWS took the perspective. We don't need to. We don't want to. we don't even want to.
We don't want to touch that.
Yeah. You keep that. Yeah. Keep that one to yourself.
So that was an interesting learning experience.
Never be on
working with AWS and working with the developers, which I've had a really good experience. Like developers I've worked with in this organization, that they started to transition out. And I think I mentioned in maybe the last show that they started off with a huge team of AWS developers, around like over 20. It's gone down to about like 3 or 4 now, and by the end of September, I think there's hopefully September, October, we're going to be maybe transition out totally, but we'll see. But the developers have been great. Like they're super smart, super great to work with, very great with knowledge sharing. They've been super helpful. But it is interesting kind of seeing their experience. And if I was them, I would feel like, okay, I can't, we can't really help you. We can't really help you that last mile, in a sense, to be able to basically make sure that, to resolve all the issues, we have to offload that to somebody else. So that can be a little bit frustrating.
We got an actual comment coming from LinkedIn. Can you believe it? From
LinkedIn. Oh, geez. I forgot we're streaming on LinkedIn. I'd be careful what I say here. Oh,
yeah. Keith says in his day job, they have a redact API to detect and remove PII. So some interesting approaches he mentions too.
That's definitely things we're looking at too, for especially as we look on managing the data from production down to the lower environments. Definitely thinking about how to sanitize a bit more, to redact, like I said, redact the information.
You may want to check out his day job. Because I'm pretty sure that if I recall correctly, is a service that they provide. But I was curious. Let's take a different direction, and something that I've been wondering about, because I haven't played with more on the application side of things. But as you scale, that's why I gave I think I gave the title of this one Big Data, right? As you scale, because that used to be big, right? Like everybody's like, "Oh, we're a big data project," and I don't hear that anymore. Do you hear that anymore? Much? Like the whole big data
in the age of, well, I think because big data has become ubiquitous because of machine learning and AI,
right?
Because you can't have AI and machine learning without a lot of data,
right?
So I think that's just been kind of an accepted way to think about it. So I think people don't talk about big data as much, but because they know that it's just big.
So
a lot of it.
I don't do a whole lot on the data side, more the application side. But as we have lots and lots of data, and as you're trying to query that, you run into limits and performance limits with certain databases, right? So at a high level, because you're talking about like, you don't want to get rid of your S3 buckets. You don't want to get rid of your databases. Those things you don't want to rebuild because, hey, there's a lot of data there. But if you're moving one of them, or if you're changing one of them, that's a process to change that data. Or you may have glue functions that move from one type of data to another, like that transform the data into another form. At a high level, like if you're working with lots of data, what's the advantage from, say, a relational database, right? Which we all, as developers, we probably all understand how that works. If you have a lot of data that you're trying to visualize, what are some of the other storage forms for it, and why are they, what advantages are they providing?
So the other storage forms for a relational database, or what are alternatives to a relational database?
Yeah. Like if you like, we got like, we do phone calls, right? Like, so we got tons of call data, or you've got tons of student data, right? Yeah. And you're trying to do some analytics on it. And it's like, guess what? You selecting this data in a relational database is going to take you forever. So, whether it's my example, we got tons of call data, your example, you got tons of student course data.
We should break it down, because it depends on how the design of that relational database, what is the state of that design? Is it how heavily normalized is it? Between what are the relationships between the tables look like? How many tables do you have, right? And, when it comes to using your foreign keys to your primary keys and be able to have table linking, how intricate are you making that within your database design? If it's very heavily,
which is okay, so that's
super normalized,
right? Like normalized data isn't the best data when you're talking about doing reporting. You want denormalized data.
Correct.
You just want give me all the data in rows.
It depends. Like I said, and this conversation is all about depends. It's kind of depends on the design, depends on the data, the type of data, how much it is, the type of queries that you're running, the type of reports that you want to run. But I would agree that if your data can become more flatter or denormalized, so if you were going to be storing it in, let's say, a non-relational or NoSQL database like DynamoDB or Mongo. Well, MongoDB is a document database. Just trying to think about other examples of non-AWS related.
No, that's fine. Go with the AWS though. I mean, it's gonna be similar, right?
Yeah.
Dynamo's key value, isn't it?
Yes. Yeah.
And
you can't store documents with it. They do have a document DB that's more in line with a MongoDB. But yeah, DynamoDB is a key value non-relational store.
So let's say you've got tons of student data, right?
Well, let's get away from my.
This is uncomfortable.
Make this a little bit more generic.
This is uncomfortable for you. I forgot. Yeah, you have a real job now. Anyway,
let's be a little bit careful. Let's
okay. Last week,
let's redact some of the types that we're talking about here.
Last week, I used the example that tool app, right, that takes pictures and categorizes your tools. So let's say we've got a ton of we've already denormalized it.
Mm-hmm.
We have all the people that have that have this tool, right? Because we've got some ID. It's like, all right, yep. But you've got a bunch of different people. They've lent it out at different times. So you got a bunch of different times, but it's all this tool. And we just want to see some charts. But we find that when we select it, even when it denormalized, because if you have a lot of rows, it's still hard, right? It's still hard to be like drilled down and say, oh, now only show me this tool, or now only show me when I lent it to my neighbor, or, so what's the value of,
and you say it's when you have multiple rows as if it isn't a NoSQL denormalized database?
No. If it's in a denormalized state in a relational database, right? Like a very wide column.
Oh, I got you.
We've already taken
one big table with a bunch of
columns. We've already taken
that
step because we've realized, joins are the worst.
Got it.
Yep. Right. So but we're still having performance issues because we've got so much data and you're trying to filter on it. And you can add indexes to everything, but once you add indexes to everything, you've added indexes to everything. Like,
that doesn't do any good.
Right. Yeah. So then what's the advantage of a Dynamo, or where would I move to better handle large masses of denormalized data like that outside of just wide columned tables in a relational database?
Well, the nice thing about you could also partition out, within. Sorry, they do have silly items. They do have silly items. You could have like a partition key. You could have separate indexes that you can specify that. And I do think that's a little bit more partition. So if you could start thinking about your DynamoDB table as one big wide table, like you're describing, and each of the keys could be considered like columns in a sense of data that you're storing. But what you could do is you could start to partition that data out for your queries to really optimize that for the reporting that you want to have. So based on the subset of data that you want to pull out of the table, you can create partitions of that data, and that allows you to optimize it a lot more. Especially if you can drill down on items that you can group together.
So you're almost
you'll know that ahead of time based on the reporting, the type of reporting, how you're going to want to get the data out, or if you want to integrate the data with, let's say, another system, and you want to provide some type of level of integration, you can start to partition it out, and then it makes it a little bit more efficient, especially for a lot of data.
So if I'm understanding that correctly,
which you can't do that in a relational database.
So is that something Dynamo just does for you? Because it's what I'm hearing, and I'm probably misunderstanding this, is almost like pre-group your data based on how you're going to query it.
No, you could still put it, let's say, define your keys, your values, how you're storing your data, but then when you define your table, and you could refactor this too.
And you define a table in Dynamo. It's been years.
You could do it's called like a partition key and a sort key. And then between the combination of those two keys, you can then start to, or I like to think of it as grouping your data. You can group your data in specific partitions that enables you to just make it more efficient when you are doing your queries.
Okay, but let's using the tool inventory example, right? If I knew at one point I was going to try to sort and kind of drill down through the data and see it by like tool type.
Your type, yeah, that's what I was thinking. I was thinking the same thing. So if you think about your sort, like it depends. I don't know if I would do that as your primary, your partition key, your partition key, but maybe your sort key, maybe that would be like, so you define like your type of the tool, and then that could be like for your hammer, screwdrivers, then you can have different specific models within
like
that.
Yeah,
that could work.
But but if I wanted to continue to drill down, right? Like if I wanted to say, hey, show me all of the measuring tools, because that's a category. Oh, great. Yeah, we'll show you stats on all that. Easy to pull that data out because it's either a partition key or a sort key. But then I'm like, yeah, but also I would like to know, based on the manufacturer, show me all DeWalt tools. Like, do I have to set up, like that seems, if I remember Dynamo correctly, you can set a partition key. You can't set multiple partition keys.
No, that's where your sort keys come in. Yeah.
Oh, but sort keys, I can have more than one?
Yeah, and there's also, you could do multiple, it's called a global index too. So like an index, you could also do a similar thing, which that's something I'm getting into, knowing a little bit more about too. But like, so like a GSI, it's called like a GSI, like a global secondary index. That also allows you to start doing a little bit more organization of that. Which,
because that feels like the problem that you run into, because it's like, yeah. If we're talking about wide denormalized tables in a relational database, you put a couple in, put the index where you need it. But then you're like, but as people drill down, they say, oh yeah, show me all the screwdrivers. Let's take a bigger category. Show me all the measuring devices. Oh, cool. And now I want to see stats, and I want to filter not by just measuring devices, but by DeWalt measuring devices.
Yeah.
And okay, as you keep. Now, like I said, we run into that. Everything now has to become an index to make this query performant as you drill down.
So it's interesting, I think, but I don't interesting if we add additional these GSIs, these global secondary indexes. I think that's actually a better fit for what you're describing, because you do want to, when you have like your partition key, your sort key, that's pretty much defined. But you can put different data within your partition keys to kind of start, for how you want to query that out. But if you do want to have a index style organization similar to what you have in a relational database, you could have multiple GSIs or multiple global secondary indexes, and that would basically give you what you want. And then from a performance standpoint, it's interesting. I don't think it would have the same negative performance that it would have in a relational database with it on a table, but that's something I have to look into a little bit more, because I'm not as familiar with that.
Because Dynamo is more or less tuned for that type of work, and not relational database work, as obviously. So that means like the evolution of how you might look at this. First, you realize joins are bad for this type of work, for large scale reporting on a large amount of data. So let's denormalize it. And after we denormalize it, we say, let's try something other than a relational database. Let's try something like Dynamo, and put that data in there.
Let's step back and go back. Like, why would you really want to choose between a relational database and a non-relational database? Like, do you have requirements that your data has to be acid, acid compliant, where it has to be atomic, it has to be consistent, has to be isolated, durable, it has to be, have all those properties. Is it a transactional database, right? So are you considering each one of your inserts as an atomic transaction, right? Or you want to make sure that's consistent. Now, you do have a little bit of that when it comes to, let's say, DynamoDB, but it is not meant to be like an ACID compliant database. So it's how that goes back to like, why are you choosing a relational database compared to starting with a non-relational database?
Probably just because of familiarity. It's like, this is how we know. Like, generally speaking, if you ask the developer, how do you store data? Well, we all know how a relational database works. And as a system, and I feel like as a application changes, you're like, well, this is where our data is. And like the steps, at least as I see it, is, we want to do reports on, the reports are so slow because of the joins. All right, let's do something that denormalizes it into rows, like these wide rows in our existing database, because we can run a job nightly, that kind of builds report data, right? And like that's the process you go through. And now all of a sudden you have denormalized data, and you say, wow, we've got so much. It's still, actually, for our big customers, it's a little slow, because they're selecting large amounts of data. And I think you're right that part of this is the trade-off of things that the relational database gives you that you don't want in that context. You don't need in that context. And then, okay.
And also how it's interesting too, and back, because I started off as a relational database programmer doing a lot of SQL after after college, and that's where I spent like the first 5 years doing a lot of work in that area. And it's interesting where especially from a refactoring standpoint, it definitely could be, an issue when it comes to relational database. That's why we have DBAs and we have people who do a good job managing, versioning and managing the state of the database. Because as a relational database could scale, definitely, even though they scale pretty well, I don't know if you want to disclose, like, you probably don't want to disclose like size or numbers or anything like that. But as it's can
I don't know, do you?
It can. I love the back and forth there. As we kind of talk around both of our jobs, so that it can definitely scale to a really, really large amount of data, right?
Sure can, yeah.
But it's interesting too, especially the modern kind of data lake architecture that companies are adopting now, where you don't think about your data as just being just in one big database. Why don't we have 10 databases? Why don't we have 100 databases? Right?
And that's the idea of the data lake, is like giving you some type of reasonable access to multiple places
all the data.
That things are stored.
Yes. So your data lake could be a combination of MySQL or Postgres databases, or it could just be S3 buckets or DynamoDB tables, right? And you could have this all be one consistent data lake that we have all of our data in, and then we can think about how we can, which, with data governance, how we know which is the appropriate locations for certain types of data, who has access to the data, how that data is intermingled or exchanged between the different data sources. We could definitely, establish that.
How do you relate something from here, in this relational database to something over here in S3, and how?
But I think enabling yourself to allow, or now allowing yourself to start thinking about your data outside of that single database into other data sources, I think is a tricky step, because especially if you build a business around one big MySQL database, and think about how we could then start to take a subset of this data and put it someplace else, because it is going to be more efficient. And then we could still have a connection between the two data sources and how we, with our keys or IDs that we're going to be using. But to think about more as just as a multi-data source type of environment rather than just a single source.
Right. And I mean, when we talk about things like data lakes, there's not like you just install the data lake application and it all works. No, it's a conceptual thing, right? It's like you then start thinking of your data as it exists in these multiple. Well, how do they relate? I don't know. Figure it out.
Well, they do. AWS does have Data Zone, Tim, that enables this.
So how does something like Data Zone work?
And like I said, my knowledge of it is limited, but from an administration standpoint, it does basically what you just said. It allows you to specify your data sources. And then also because really what I've been also seeing too is that permissions is a huge thing when it comes to not only when I say permissions of people who can access the data, but also just the permissions between the functions, between the different, between your instances, that how they access the data. So being able, if you have, let's say 100 different data sources in one data lake, managing the permissions between those resources can be a huge amount of work. So Data Zone kind of gives you that ability. It allows you to organize all of your data sources together, and then start to having some infrastructure from a permission standpoint. It enables that. Makes it a little bit easier.
Some of the tooling to help you, but I feel like still a lot of it is you having to describe how things are related. There's not like it just all somehow magically works, which is what we're used to when we use a singular point of data storage. So
but then also you have like other tools like lake formation too, that kind of gives you ways to kind of build up a data lake too. So kind of you could start with that just to give you kind of a good kind of starting point of these are some good starting resources. And it's if you are going to want to have a data lake between, that you're going to want to move data between, different jobs, it gives you a good kind of infrastructure for that too.
Gotcha. So what all do you use at your job, Mark?
Oh, I'm not getting into no, I'd like to keep my job. So I'm trying to, I will definitely be happy to talk about AWS. Talk about my experience at AWS, the good and the bad. I'll definitely be happy to talk about that.
Speaking of keeping Mark's job, so Pangea, not a sponsor, but let's just let this.
It feels like Pangea is like a name of like a bunch of different companies.
It probably is. You're gonna look for Pangea.
It feels like a fashion brand to me.
Pangea.cloud.
.cloud.
Again,
okay.
not a sponsor, but we're just going to
throw
this out there.
It's a very cool name.
If you watch the live show and you drop a comment, you will probably get a mention, because that happens so infrequently, right? And not only that, but just think of all the people that will hear your comment. It will be literally a few of them. So very many of the few listeners we have will hear this mentioned. But no, Pangea has a redact API where apparently you send it your data and it will it'll identify the parts that are PII and give you back redacted data. Now, I think I don't feel like it's necessarily the use case you have. I feel like it could probably be applied there where you're trying to create a redacted version for your integrators, right? I think it's more like, hey, we don't even ever want to store this. So if you did something stupid and you sent us PII, we're stripping it out, type of thing. Or like, from a, say you do transcripts or something like audio transcripts of a phone call. Maybe you say, yeah, of course, people may have mentioned things on the call, but we can't be storing those long term. I could see you taking those transcripts and passing them through Pangea's API and pulling out the PII. So you definitely have a transcript of the meeting, but you don't have a digital archive of somebody's either credit card number or password or whatever may have been mentioned in the meeting. So there you go.
So it's interesting, and they do the redaction processes where if they want to remove the data, like kind of to sanitize the data.
That's what it looks like, yeah.
Because AWS does have a service called AWS Macy, which does the detection. So you could run your data through Macy, and that could, or point Macy to a data source, and then they could get, you could know if some of that data does have PI information. I don't think it does do the actual redaction part of it. So if you want to transform that data and make it not PI, or make a copy of it, make it not PII, I don't know if it could do that. Assuming that's why they have integrations with the generative AI. That could be really good. So if, generate me a list of I was going to say student names.
Whoa, Mark.
Or tool names. I should think of the toolbox. Items in your toolbox.
I should plug that too. I should, because we're talking
a name of Allen wrenches. I don't know.
Allen wrenches.
Just trying to think of cool names now. Try to step back. That's also the problem doing this show in the middle of the day, as we're going in and out of meetings too. Of like, okay, I'm working a little bit before the show, and then after this, I'm going to be working on other stuff. So it's like I have to like totally switch to my.
Yeah, welcome to my world. Yeah.
It's not good.
This is 82 episodes into that. So Keith says that you can use it for output too. So if you have a bunch, I guess, of data that might have PII in it, and you're concerned about the output before we put it on a screen, like, hey, this is output that cannot contain it. We're cool with storing it, but over here you should never see it, like extracting social security numbers, driver's license IDs, all that kind of stuff.
I could see this as like a good pipeline to use, especially if you don't want that PI data landed in your system at all. So if you have policies in place, if you don't want policies where like in your either an S3 bucket or a database table, we don't want that data at all to even get into our environment at all. So to use this as an API to send the data through as like a middle layer, that then if it passes, it can then land, or if it needs to be transformed before it gets there. I can see there's value in that.
I feel like I can give an example about what I imagine your job to be. But we'll but no, if I was managing student records and I was outputting a transcript or something, I could say, whatever automated system is pulling this data together, run it through this before you output it, because this should never contain PII. Like, as a developer, I don't think it should contain a PII, but let's just make sure. Or for my example, if we got like maybe call transcripts or notes or something like that, and you're going to output something, and we shouldn't be storing it anyway, or this process should not include perhaps PII we know we are storing and we are responsible about it. But just before we output it, throw it through this to make sure we would never accidentally leak that, because it shouldn't exist, and this is not an output that is reasonable to have PII in. Yeah. And don't want a school example, like use healthcare, right? Like, this is some type of form that is supposed to be output for this process. Obviously, healthcare systems contain PII, right? And however we've assembled the transformation, so it, we don't believe we're pulling from sources that contain it. But what if somebody in a note was like, oh yeah, we need to change this because we had the wrong driver's license ID. That note gets, on output, we pass it, the entire document through it and remove it. So yeah, probably some interesting things you can do with that. I feel like we should also plug the fact that we keep using this ToolStash app as an example because we don't want to talk about our own jobs. And what is it? It's toolstash.com. You should check it out, Mark.
Is this one where you take a picture of your tools?
Yeah,
and just tells you what's in the picture?
I'm not making it up. It's like an actual thing. I think it's Josh. I want to say Josh Pickford.
It's a good idea.
Something like that. He used to run Barometrics, which was a SaaS reporting tool. I think he exited that and has tried a couple other things. I kind of follow him on Twitter. He's an interesting guy. But yeah, ToolStash is
take a picture, to take pictures and just analyze the pictures. And
he could use Pangea too, because if you accidentally took a picture of your driver's license next to the tool, he might want that. I would say sanitize that one in input.
I would agree.
Yeah, just make sure you're not accidentally pulling someone's social security number from the letter they had from the IRS right next to the wrench they were taking a picture of. So all right, well, we usually end this thing with like an unfinished conversation that kicks off the next one. But
I'm actually impressed. We did two shows in a row. Does this mean we're back on track?
I don't know. Should we both look at our calendar for next week and see how?
I'm hoping Fridays stay like today. This day is interesting. Which I'm going back. Yeah, I'll be doing a lot of Teams chats today. Maybe I'll be pulled into a meeting this afternoon. We'll see. But it's interesting. This date, I didn't have any scheduled meetings for Friday, so I'm hoping they keep this. This will be nice. Just keep like Fridays a little bit light, because actually I was looking to get caught up this afternoon on some work because of how it is with you mostly work in a remote company. You have your week full of meetings and you look towards trying to finish up some work near the end of the week because the meetings start to scale back a little bit.
Yeah, it's been busy. I've got a couple things on my to-do list that I need to finish up before a meeting today, actually. So yeah.
So Fridays, I'm hoping, maybe we get back to some Dead Fridays, then it'll be a little bit easier. Like I said, I was dealing with something before we got online, and I'll probably deal with something after we get offline. But all right, it is what it is. But
I love that now you are seeing, now you're experiencing a little bit of the past 80 episodes. Yeah, and like having Slack messages or Teams messages for you coming in while you're doing the podcast. Did you? we'll just handle a little bit of this after show business before the show ends. Did you upload last week's recording?
I did. Yeah, okay, so it is uploaded to the.
I will try
to our shared location, which I will not disclose for security reasons.
It's Dropbox, guys. It's Dropbox. Which I remember talking to somebody from Dropbox, and it's kind of scary. When you talk about PII and what they can see or something like that, it's kind of scary.
We should talk about a solution I made for myself over, I think it was the beginning of summer. Actually, no, maybe it was actually, I've actually been using it for a while now, but I improved it, I think, around the beginning of summer, how I store, how I want to encrypt information locally on my computers. And actually I have it backed up to S3. That. So I have like my own encryption. I use like the Ansible command line to encrypt files. So I basically have one folder and have all my files that are private information. So all my tokens, all of my logins, all my keys. Like I don't use 1Password anymore. I keep everything text files. And then what I do is I have a process I could just trigger with like a couple keys at the command line that encrypts this whole folder and then backs up to S3 automatically.
And I can also download. You can open it in Vim, which is your editor of choice, right?
Exactly. That's what I want. That's what I do.
But you do Vim in Emacs mode? Is that, I forget what is
I just do NeoVim now.
NeoVim? Okay.
I was using the Doom Emacs for a while, which is basically Vim and Emacs. I was living in that world for a little bit, but yeah, I'm a NeoVimmer. In my terminal. Is
that your true self, Mark?
I do have other editors. I do have JetBrains installed and Visual Studio Code. I open up occasionally. It's good when I want to have a tree view to browse my 20 repos that I need to manage. Yes, I will open up that. But if I'm just working on the code, the fingers are flowing on the NeoVim.
All right, so I got we can talk about Mark's encryption system. We've got hopefully I'll get this episode up today
because it is open source. We could look at the repo.
It is.
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah. So yeah.
I want to turn the thing that I do to transcribe this and generate the show notes. I want to turn that into a like a little app or something.
Eventually,
instead of being command line here, so we'll see. But
we can automate this whole podcast.
Oh yeah, we're gonna automate the pod. I forgot that. Yeah. We still need to get back to that. All right, next week. All right, here we go with the after. You could hear the music this time, though, right?
Yes, I could hear the music. Yeah, that sounded good.
You are so distracted today.
That sounded good. That sounded good. I had to
halfway through the show. I was just going to throw some crazy things. Did you see that Google just shut down Gmail, Mark?
Are we like not streaming on?
No, we're still streaming. This is the after show.
We'll turn it off and I'll explain a little bit more what I was going through.
I'm serious. I'm going to add this one before I turn it off. I was going to be like, and did you hear that Google shut down Gmail and, Apple decided not to, you were just going to be like, yeah, no, that's, I saw that.
Well, Google shuts down everything. I probably would just accept it. But like, oh my gosh, I got to check my email.
If I refresh on my Gmail, it's gone. All right. I'll hit end stream now. Ending stream. Sorry.